Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Thursday, June 27th, and today is day 265. Normally, Moose joins me when I do my daily updates. I'll introduce you to another member of our family. This is Luca. Luca is a 200-pound Great Dane who is kind of hungry for his dinner. And so he might be joining us for the whole update today because I can't get him to lay down. So part of our family life is we have two Great Danes and a poodle. I'm just thinking about Romans chapter 12, verse 9. Delight in that which is good, hate what is evil, and delight in what is good. And this beast is a beautiful creation of God. So welcome, Luca. Oh, and Lord have mercy, the things that are happening in the Middle East. But an update from today. U.S. officials have warned Israel during meetings with Defense Minister Gallant that according to American intelligence, even a limited Israeli ground offensive in South Lebanon could lead to broader regional conflict involving Iran, regardless of whether or not Israel publicly declares that it is not interested in one. So in other words, it sounds like the U.S. is telling Israel to not attack, to not have a ground invasion. Now, the U.S. has said that before in relationship to Rafah, to no avail. We have been saying that this could escalate into a broader conflict for a long time. During his visit to Washington, D.C., Defense Minister Gallant told reporters that the IDF is capable of taking Lebanon back to the Stone Age in any war with Hezbollah, but insisted his government prefers a diplomatic solution rather than a military one. It's interesting, reports I've read have said Lebanon's capabilities are so much more extreme or advanced than Hamas's military capabilities. And, we've been talking about Hamas and whether or not Hamas could be defeated. Even the IDF spokesperson had said that Hamas is more of an ideology than just its military capabilities. So that evaluation was what Gallant communicated. But analysts have been saying actually that if Israel went to war against Hezbollah, many would say that even in the 2006 war, that it was a very difficult war. Many would say Hezbollah actually won that war. There's quite a bit of different analysis in that regard. The director of a medical center in northern Israel wrote to his staff, they must prepare for an escalation in hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah, telling them that the level of preparedness required of us has been high for almost 9 months. And now it appears that even more will be required of us. The IDF said that it killed a Hezbollah operative from a unit in charge of launching drones into Israel from Lebanon, and that the Air Force struck additional Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon. It's interesting that the news, at least that which is coming out of Israel, the vast majority of it is focused right now on Lebanon and not on Gaza. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut urged its citizens to strongly reconsider travel to Lebanon as the security environment remains complex and can change quickly. The French ministry in France is extremely concerned about the situation in Lebanon and added that all parties should show restraint. And reports in Lebanon said that Israeli drone strikes attacked a motorcycle in South Lebanon. In terms of ceasefire and hostage negotiations, parents of Israelis killed or kidnapped during the Hamas October 7th assault petitioned the High Court of Justice to order that a state commission of inquiry be established to investigate the events. And anti-government protests began a day of demonstrations by blocking a major highway in central Israel today. Protests demanded a hostage release deal, and early elections are planned throughout the day across the country. Protests demanded a hostage release deal and early election are planned throughout the day across the country. I'll have to look more into that because I don't know what elections they're speaking of. So I will find out more about that. In terms of Gaza, Palestinians in Gaza reported that the IDF began bombarding Shujaiya and Gaza City's Zaytun neighborhood. A resident reported that land forces also took part in the offensive and added that people took to the streets carrying nothing to flee for their lives. The Palestinian Red Crescent later reported that 30 were wounded in Shujaiya and 2 were killed in a strike at the Nusrat refugee camp in central Gaza. The Israeli Minister of Defense Gallant said that he discussed with U.S. officials his proposals for governance of post-war Gaza that would include local Palestinians, regional partners, and the U.S., but that it would be a long and complex process. That's disconcerting because one of the major concerns is the permanent presence of Israelis in Gaza. The U.S. has committed that they do not support a permanent presence, but what I heard on the ground and what others have reported is that Israel has said there's no alternative for legitimate security needs to be met. The death toll in Gaza reported today is 37,765 Palestinians killed, and those wounded is 86,429. Israel's state comptroller, Matan Engelman, sent a letter to Prime Minister Netanyahu and warned him that the country is not adequately prepared for evacuation in the north if war with Hezbollah broke out. In the letter, Engelman detailed his concern about a disagreement between the National Security Minister and the Interior Ministry regarding whose responsibility and the protocol for such evacuations. He said the unresolved reality, 9 months of war, when tens of thousands of people from 2 areas of Israel are already displaced from their homes, and a looming possibility of war in the north is unacceptable. I'll just remind people, and maybe you recall, more than 100,000 residents from Israel had been displaced from along the Gaza border and from northern Israel. Very few of those residents, one of the cities near the Gaza border, which I learned in being there, and I visited the city, Sderot, the city, most of those residents couldn't afford to not move back home. It wasn't that it was deemed that it was safe. So many of the people from the kibbutzim along the Gaza border have not returned home as of yet. And those on the northern border have not returned home either. And so the government has been subsidizing for months and months and months these families who've been displaced from their homes. And that number is equal to the number of people who've been displaced in South Lebanon as well. It was reported by the Washington Post that the U.S. has provided Israel with military aid of approximately $6.5 billion since October 7th. I mean, this number is astounding. $6.5 billion of military aid from the United States to Israel. So when we say the U.S. is not only complicit in providing the weapons, the U.S. is actively participating in further militarization and in support of the bombing of Gaza. That's what we're talking about. $6.5 billion of military aid. In the West Bank, Canada's government announced it has imposed sanctions on the Amana movement, which is a settlement enterprise flagship organization, on the veteran settler Daniela Weiss as a part of a new round of sanctions on Israeli individuals and entities for their role in facilitating, supporting, or financially contributing to acts of violence against civilians and their property. The extremist Lahava movement and its founder, Benzi Gopstein, are also amongst those sanctioned. Israeli forces also carried out what they have identified as counter-terror operations in the Jenin refugee camp overnight into this morning, Thursday morning. And the IDF announced that Captain Saju 22 was killed in the West Bank in Jenin. 16 other soldiers sustained light to moderate wounds in that same incident. I have not seen reported numbers on Palestinians injured or killed, which is typically also reported. The Israeli Prison Service, this is quite significant. We've been talking about prisoners and the treatment of Palestinian political prisoners. The Israeli Prison Service has been concealing information about the amount of food given to Palestinian security prisoners since the beginning of October. This was according to Israeli security sources. This was reported to Haaretz. Sources in the defense establishment cast doubt on the legality of the prison services move and warned that providing less than a minimum amount of food required by international law and concealing the information would have serious repercussions. We have seen pictures from people that we know and people that we work with and that are almost unrecognizable after spending months in Israeli prisons, and reports of just food, being thrown and having to being eaten off the floor. And this is an official report stating that the amount of food is less than the minimum amount of food required by international law. In Syria, 3 people were killed and 11 wounded in a strike attributed to Israel south of Damascus. According to a human rights group in Syria, they claimed that the attack targeted a facility that is used by Hezbollah and Iranian militias. There have been numerous incidents where Israel has attacked to address militias previously. Congressional updates. I was asked today in our Thursday briefing, I do a live briefing every Thursday for 30 minutes about the status of the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act in Congress. Our understanding is that it's still sitting in the Senate. We've not heard anything about movement in that regard. HR 8771 is an appropriations bill. I was asked about this today as well, that specifically relates to the funding of programs in the State Department, USAID, and other international programs. It's a House version. It has to pass in the House. It will not pass in the Senate. The votes in the House were happening today. If they kept the schedule, members were able to offer amendments related to specific items or funding requests. But Moskowitz, who's a representative from Florida, a Democrat, offered an amendment that would disallow any funding for State Department offices that used statistics from the health ministry in Gaza when reporting on the number of deaths in Gaza. So that was significant. The last thing I just want to share, I know that the presidential debates are happening tonight between President Donald Trump and former President Donald Trump and the current President Joe Biden. Lord have mercy is all I have to say to that. Mark your calendars for Sunday, July 21st. July 21st, we're calling it Solidarity Sunday. We'd ask you, please, please, please invite your church to put something in the bulletin. We can give you prayers. Ask them to pray for us, Churches for Middle East Peace. Ask them to pray for an end to the war on Gaza. Ask them to pray for an end to all violence in the Middle East. We're seeking to provide opportunities, regardless of where your church is at, for all of our member communion churches to call for peace. We would love for them to call for a comprehensive permanent ceasefire, to call for an end to ethnic cleansing, the prevention of genocide. That will be too much for some of your denominations. So at a minimum, we're asking that churches would pray for peace. Solidarity Sunday, we'd love them to show videos. We'll have videos from Palestinian Christians talking about what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in the region. We'll have lots of different options for that, but there'll be more information in tomorrow's bulletin. If your church is interested, have them reach out to us at info@cmep.org. We'll be providing prayers, worship, resources at a minimum. We're hoping that churches will pray for peace and justice and an end to war and violence in the Middle East. There'll be 4 different options in terms of what the Solidarity Sunday could be called. It could be called Solidarity Sunday, Standing with Christians in the Holy Land. Solidarity Sunday, Praying for Peace in Gaza and the Middle East. Solidarity Sunday, Calling for a Comprehensive Ceasefire, or Solidarity Sunday, Working Together to Prevent Genocide. And our hope is that churches will say, we are joining with others on the Solidarity Sunday to call for a comprehensive ceasefire. We're joining with others on the Solidarity Sunday to work together to prevent genocide. And so that is our invitation as we work together towards peace.